tell us, how important is your everyday life to your inspiration? How autobiographical is your work?
As a child, it was sort of boredom, really. I mean, I grew up on Merseyside, and, you know, the Second World War started. I mean, you couldn't go anywhere. The Blitz, Liverpool was being blitzed. You know, the seaside was full of barbed wire. There was absolutely nothing to do. We had the radio. And I drew a lot. And I think making up stories, I think, you know, that was really what I did to escape from just the dreariness of it all. But I do think now, I don't think there's ever been an ideal childhood. You know, one can't ever say what an ideal childhood would be, but I think maybe I think children have, of course, a much better time now. People make so much more of an effort to understand their problems. And as writers, people do. You know, we get much more inside their imagination and how they develop. But the one thing I think they don't have is that they are over-entertained, that there's so much on offer, that it's quite hard to just get them, you know, sometimes to sit down with a book and just share it together. Read aloud, or if they're little, they're looking at the pictures, you know, sitting on the lap. And I think to do that is probably the most important challenge now, really, to get people to give time to...
And so a simple message, but your children, to what extent were your own children a stimulus for Alfie, Annie, Rose and Naughty Little Sister?
They were a bit, but I never used them as models. And they're not my own. Alfie isn't any of my own children. I do use sketchbooks. You see, I lurk about in parks and play areas. And you get an eye for the way children relate to each other, the way they stand when they're a little bit unsure of themselves, the way they then, you know, suddenly run off, you know, and all scatter like starlings,
or interact.
And interact. Yes. But this is all watching the way they move. And I don't have a camera. I don't have a camera. I don't know how to use a camera, not properly. And I don't have a computer. And I do everything in sketchbooks. You know, I've kept sketches. I was married to someone who liked drawing architecture. And some of our happiest times were going off. Clara had her sketchbook, and John had his, and he drew the buildings. He could look at some amazing Bravante facade in Italy, which is where we spent our time drawing. And I was always looking at the corner of somebody's allotment or some kid in the square, you know.
So what you're saying is really interesting about what you do, which is just intuitive almost. It's seeing a scene and reproducing it in your sketchbook. So it's very definitely not trying to create a message, and yet, no, exactly, and yet what you do, of course, is such a powerful message, just as you've said, helping children go to a party without their security blanket or all of that. So
I don't sort of think I must put a message in here at all. No, I do it all out of character.
And do you think that's changed in children's books? Do you think that is what children's authors are encouraged to try and provide now?
I don't know what they're encouraged. It depends what their editors. You know, I have a very, very good editor, and you know, several good editors. And you've they never leave me been very free. Oh no. If you come up with an idea, they may make suggestions about it, or you know, it's a partnership. You can't work, and of course you're also working with the designer who's actually helping you with the format and so on. But no, I think, you know, the most important thing about doing, when I first started, you see, I was a working illustrator. I wasn't doing my own books for ages. And my first big breakthrough you mentioned was Dorothy Edwards. She saw my stuff and said, could you get this woman to do my next Naughty Little Sister stories? And they're still in print, you know, they're wonderful. They're terribly old-fashioned now, but they're just classics, and they'll probably go on and on.
Timeless.
And having done that, I did some pretty awful other stuff. You know, we'll draw a veil over quite a lot of the stuff I did, you know. And then I gradually started to do, I did one book of my own. It was called Lucy and Tom's Day, and it was Lucy and Tom. It was just what they did in the day, and then they went to the seaside and so on. And so, it, you know, it developed from there. But I must just,
yes.
I must just tell you, no, do ask Judith first.
No, I don't want to stop you.
No, first ask Judith what she...
Well, where else does inspiration come from? You don't have a sketchbook and go out,
I do draw, obviously,
yes.
I'm much more of a drawer than a writer, really. I mean, I wanted to be a painter. It was one thing I wanted was just get to art school, which was difficult. Inspiration. The cats was big stuff, and my childhood, my parents. I wanted to remember my parents. I wanted my children to know about my parents because they hadn't really known them.
And you're still working now.
Yes.
So when you wake up and you think, what shall I write about or draw today? I mean, you're both so doubly talented.
Well, you know, once
and pictures.
It's quite worrying when you finished a book to think what will you do next, and.
Do you have the equivalent of writer's block? Is it illustrator's block? I'm not sure what the word for it is.
I haven't had, and I'm touching wood, but I find usually I have an idea, I cast about, and then I have an idea of something that would be good to do, but exactly how to do it, because I think I've changed a lot. I'm married to a writer. My father was a writer. I now have a son who's a writer. So there's a lot of writing about, but I'm really a drawer. But you have to have something to hang it on. And
is that inhibiting to have so many writers?
No, it's very good. I've learned so much. I mean, my husband taught me so much about construction and everything. It was wonderful. But I find, well, with the last book, I knew the sort of thing I wanted to do, but exactly how, it was a fantasy, sort of. I'm not going to explain it. But I find it's quite, sometimes it takes a long time to get it right. You know the sort of thing you want it to be, you know maybe the beginning and the end, but the how exactly, and whether it's things that are going to be interesting to draw, which is very important. That is sometimes.
And you're a good critic of your own work, I'm sure. You know.
Well, you can't, there's this weird thing, unless it's right, it's not just that it isn't right, you actually can't do it. If it doesn't pull you along, you can't do it. It's, you can't say, oh, well, it doesn't matter, I'll just do this. It's very odd, but you can't.